us started here. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for the third part of the Maternal and Child Health Lunch and Learn series. My name is Danielle Ginther. I'm a recent grad from NDSU's MCH program. Today, Dr. Ramona Danielson will actually be presenting on ACEs and trauma-informed approaches.
Thank you, Danielle. Adverse childhood experiences and specifically trauma-informed approaches and protective factors, these are passions of mine and areas of research along with community self-healing. I am faculty in the NDSU Department of Public Health, and I teach in our maternal and child health subplan. Thank you all for joining us. I know there are some competing events today, but anyone you know that is interested in seeing this, they will have the opportunity to see it recorded. All the webinars will be available on North Dakota Train soon, and the CEUs and digital badges will still be able to be earned. And just a heads up that our fourth and final Lunch and Learn in our Maternal Child Health series will be next Tuesday on framing and public health communication. Our objectives for today's presentation are to realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential pathways to recovery, to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma among people in our lives, to know how to respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies and practices, and to know how to actively resist triggering trauma reactions. Just a note on the maternal and child health leadership competencies. If you've attended others, you've heard us mention these during our Lunch and Learn series. Specifically, there are 12 foundational and advanced skills that have been determined essential for the maternal child health workforce. And these competencies are used as training tools and as evaluation to understand where the workforce is at. And it gives us an opportunity to help you know where the content we're providing fits within those competencies. And so today we'll be talking about some knowledge base and context for maternal and child health populations. We'll also be asking for self-reflection. We'll be touching on topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We'll be talking about the importance of honoring lived experience and the importance of a systems approach. I want to begin by sharing what the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, has described as the 6 core principles to using trauma-informed approaches. And throughout the presentation, I just want you to consider how you've had opportunities to experience these principles in your own life and in your work, and how you've had opportunities to either use these principles or how you maybe could use these principles in your life and work with women, children, families, and communities. The 6 principles are safety in physical settings and interpersonal interactions, trustworthiness and transparency, which is to operate with transparency and consistency, respect, and fairness to help build and maintain trust. Peer support from those with lived experiences of trauma, or in the case of children with a history of trauma, their family members. Collaboration and mutuality, which is a lot about leveling of power differences and shared decision-making. Empowerment, which is recognizing and building upon individual strengths and experiences. And cultural, historical, and gender issues, and specifically moving beyond stereotypes and biases in these areas. SAMHSA also talks about the 4 R's of trauma-informed approaches, and these are action words that help you to think how you can be trauma-informed in your life and work. And these will look familiar because there are learning objectives for the presentation, and they are to realize, recognize, respond, and resist re-traumatization. First, we'll talk about realizing the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential pathways to recovery. And we know that many of you are pretty familiar with ACEs, but we also want to make sure that there is a shared understanding. So some of this might be review and you still might learn something new. When we think about our individual development and health, this image shows the intersection of 3 major categories of factors affecting our well-being. We can think of our individual biology, such as our genetic predispositions, our psychology, how we learn, our personality, our coping skills, and our social context, which would be our social supports and our cultural traditions, things like that. It's crucial to understand that these factors are not fixed. They are affected by experiences of childhood adversity and continued adversity experienced across the lifespan, as well as the protective factors in our lives in childhood and adulthood. Many people are now familiar with the research about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. These are potentially traumatic events in childhood that can negatively affect physical, mental, emotional, behavioral development, and they can have lasting effects on our health, well-being, and prosperity throughout adulthood. The 10-question ACE score that many of us are familiar with identifies childhood experiences of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, emotional and physical neglect, and challenges among adults in the household where a child lives, such as substance misuse, mental illness, divorce or separation, incarceration, and intimate partner violence. An ACE score of 4 or more of these experiences is where more health and social related problems are found when we do population level studies. This image visualizes the larger context for how adversity and trauma can operate in our lives. The tree, marked by number 1, represents the dynamics in the home that we typically think of with ACEs. The dynamics outside the home are also sources of trauma. We can talk about adverse community environments, which are represented as the soil and roots from which we grow, and these are marked by the number 2. These include experiences stemming from historical trauma, racism, lack of jobs, violence in the community, and poor housing quality. And the effects of climate change are increasingly being recognized as another source of adversity for families, including the effects of excessive heat, wildfires, flooding, sea level rise. These are marked by number 3. I want to take a moment to talk about the many terms that get used to describe the adversity that children and families experience. They all work to capture much of the same idea. So ACEs was coined from the original study done in the 1990s. And we know that the 10 categories in the study are not a comprehensive list, but they have continued to demonstrate in research their ability to capture a dose of adversity that a child experiences in their home. And the ACE study was the first study to make the connection between the accumulation of experiences and the consequences across the lifespan. And as such, this ACE score has proven to be a very useful tool. The term childhood adversity refers to circumstances and events that create environments that can damage a child's physical and mental well-being. This can include ACEs, but those other factors out in the community like bullying, discrimination, extreme poverty, and community violence. The term trauma can be an outcome of childhood adversity, but it can also be the result of a specific event like a natural disaster, the death of a close family member, a serious car accident. Toxic stress is generally the result of adversity that is unpredictable, long-lasting, or extreme, and that occurs in the absence of a healthy relationship with an adult who can help buffer the effects. Toxic stress is generally seen to be the way in which adversity impacts a child's development and well-being. And I will be talking more about how to buffer stress for children and families through protective factors later on in the presentation. These circles represent a way to visualize that trauma can operate at different levels. The traditional 10-question ACE score points to trauma at the individual level and family level, or in the previous image, the tree, while the soil and environment can be seen here in the group, community, and mass trauma levels. People often think of examples of historical trauma and think that they don't necessarily still have impacts today because they happened so long ago. So for example, the slaughter of millions of buffalo from as many as 60 million bison at the end of the 18th century to 456 wild bison by 1892. This is one example of events that annihilated the lifeways of Indigenous people on this continent, and these effects are still seen today. There are more place-specific and contemporary traumas that we also benefit from understanding. So for example, here in North Dakota, this is a picture of Chairman George Gillette of the 3 affiliated tribes. He's second from the left, and other tribal officials at the 1948 signing of the Garrison Dam Agreement. The town of Newtown, North Dakota, which is a bit northwest of Bismarck, was platted in 1950 as a replacement site for residents of 10 communities that were flooded by the dam. And the dam flooded a fourth of the Fort Berthold Reservation, including the tribal headquarters and the hospital, along with 154,000 acres of fertile farmland. And this picture on the right is of the Oahe Dam surge tanks on the Missouri River, which is just north of Pierre, South Dakota. 160,000 acres of the Standing Rock Reservation, sharing geography with North Dakota and South Dakota, were submerged by flooding resulting from its construction. The consequences of trauma can be passed down from one generation to the next, especially if children don't have protective factors like positive childhood experiences or a caring adult in their lives. Also, when families experience historical and systemic racism or living in poverty for generations, the effects can add up over time. And many communities are working to heal from that trauma to protect future generations. Our next R is to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma among people in our lives. I'll briefly go over those overarching signs and symptoms and want you to think about people we interact regularly in our lives. We'll recognize people in our families, friends, neighbors, also our coworkers, as well as the people and communities that we interact with through our work. For the sake of illustration, let's think of two roads. The top road is nice and smooth and represents safe, nurturing environments. The bottom road is bumpy and represents environments that create toxic stress. At the left is conception, and as you follow along the road, brains and bodies are developing, leading to experiences in adulthood. On the top road, where a child has many positive experiences and warm connections, they might be experiencing positive stress, they are developing to thrive. On the bottom road, where toxic stress is created, such as through neglect or abuse or exposure to violence, the child is adapting to survive. Unfortunately, the adaptations on the bottom road do not help a child to navigate the same world as children on the top road. While hypervigilance can help a child survive a dangerous home or community environment, it can make it hard to pay attention and learn at school. And the stress can lead to long-term and chronic physical and mental health challenges in adulthood. Fortunately, we're continuing to learn about ways in which we can help a child navigate significant stresses to help avoid them from becoming toxic stress. And we can help adults and children who have experienced toxic stress to heal and thrive. And we're also learning ways to prevent childhood trauma and adversity altogether. Recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma among people in our lives includes understanding the impact of trauma on individuals. We may find that altered development has impacted executive functioning skills. We may also find that people with trauma are doing very well in some areas of their lives, but struggling in others. So we can think about some of the emotional impacts, behavioral impacts, physical and developmental impacts, cognitive, interpersonal, and spiritual impacts on individuals. And just to give you a few examples of how this operates, as a person who has experienced trauma, are we able to ignore stimuli that don't bother others? Are we hypervigilant? Do we interpret something as threatening that others perceive as neutral? We may have challenges making meaning from language. We may have a harder time paying attention. We may have a poorer memory, and we may have a harder time being able to analyze the situation when we're emotional. With emotional impacts, we can think of how quickly and intensely do we experience negative emotional reactions, and how quickly are we able to recover our equilibrium? Do we show inhibition or lack of inhibition that's out of proportion to the situation? Do we choose healthy coping strategies when we're stressed? And interpersonal impacts can include that poor emotional self-control, which is going to impact relationships, more difficulty perceiving or responding to social cues, more difficulty navigating friendships, which can lead to social isolation, more sexual promiscuity, more aggression and violent outbursts, and challenges with setting healthy boundaries. There are impacts of trauma at the community level too. We see the impact on the physical and built environment through deteriorated public spaces, degraded infrastructure, climate change, and limited availability of healthy food. We see challenges in the economic and educational environment, including intergenerational poverty, long-term unemployment, and limited employment opportunities. Historical community disinvestment can mean there's a lack of infrastructure or resources in the community. And we also see challenges in the social cultural environment. This includes damaged social networks, a low sense of collective effectiveness to bring about change, and feelings of fear and shame. The breadth and depth of personal and community needs can be very wide, and it can be hard to focus on upstream solutions when there are many urgent critical needs. Members of the community can feel very disempowered and not have a strong sense of community ownership. It can lead to distrust and disconnection. There can be social, cultural, generational isolation, and there can be instability, unreliability, and inconsistency in how people live their day-to-day lives. We also may see what we call lateral aggression or crabs in the bucket. And there can be widespread patterns of unhealthy relationships and substance abuse, as well as transmittal bases to the next generation. And it can be difficult to envision the future and positive change in those circumstances. It's important to look at the workplace as an environment that needs trauma-informed approaches as well. There are work-related stresses that can jeopardize the mental health of all workers, and these are even harder for those with a history of trauma. Some examples of stressors in the workplace include having an unclear job role or mismatched skills, having excessive workloads, understaffing, administrative burden, feeling a lack of control over one's job design or workload, having unsafe working conditions, experiencing bullying, discrimination, exclusion, feeling job insecurity, limited support for growth or lack of resources, having conflicting home and work demands, lack of transparency, poor or inconsistent communication, and secondary and vicarious trauma. I'm going to take a moment for those of you who've been on other lunch and learns. You know what we're about to do. Mentimeter is a great tool for getting feedback from our audience in an anonymous way, and invite you all to participate. Please go to menti.com and enter code 53639298. And you can also scan the QR code here. And the QR code and the code for menti.com will remain the same throughout the presentation. So again, at menti.com, please think about someone who has experienced trauma. What do you think would be some effects in the workplace that we may see due to work stressors? So if someone has that experience of trauma and they've experienced some of those work stresses I just outlined for you, what do you think are the effects in the workplace? And people are weighing in: anger, outbursts, isolation, not being able to focus on job tasks, anxiety, late to work, short temper, irritability, inability to stay on task or make deadlines, limited productivity, difficulty building relationships or trust, difficulty focusing, disassociation, excuses for not completing work, dominating a manager or boss that reflects dominating voices in the past, not receiving constructive criticism well. Please feel free to keep weighing in. Tough to accept coaching, not the constructive criticism, exactly, lonely, isolation. These are all excellent examples. And I want you to think about if you've ever had a coworker in your work environment that has displayed some of these factors, to think about how understanding that these may be trauma-related responses can create more empathy for what a person is experiencing. And it also changes what we think the solutions might be for those issues. And for anyone who might be able to personally identify with some of these experiences, to also give yourself more compassion about how having experienced trauma and stresses in the workplace can create responses that we're maybe not proud of, but that are also a stress response, and that there are strategies that we can do to help everyone be successful. And that's why I'm really passionate about trauma-informed approaches being relevant really in any setting. They don't hurt anyone, and they help, people that you wouldn't even necessarily anticipate. People don't, is where the fact that they've experienced trauma or are currently triggered necessarily right on their face. We don't have a ACE score on our pin to our shirt. Thank you for those of you who gave some input there. Appreciate it. And research has shown just what you all were identifying, that we see these negative impacts in the workplace, and they can also impact turnover and absenteeism, productivity, lower executive function, lower quality work, counterproductive practices, and an overall deterioration of work culture. We can actively recognize signs of trauma through supervision practices. A lot of fields that have workers who are working directly in the field are implementing reflective supervision to help prevent burnout. And also, we can do workforce development. We can implement trauma-informed approaches that will benefit everyone. And always the employee assistance programs are a good practice as well. Our next R is to respond by integrating the knowledge about trauma that we have into our policies and practices. We've learned a lot about how the trauma and adversity negatively impacts children, adults, and communities. And now we need to translate our understanding into our knowledge and our work, our understanding into our work. So this can include applying trauma-informed approaches within our personal lives as well as our professional lives. So to start talking about protective factors, it's important to remember that we are all individuals, and that what one person experiences as toxic stress may be tolerable stress to another person. And the differences can be attributed to a variety of factors, including their biology and psychology, and additionally, protective factors in our social environment. These are extremely influential in how children and adults will function when they've experienced traumatic experiences. And it's important to understand what we can do to prevent the negative effects. So research has identified a common set of protective factors that help children have positive outcomes even when faced with significant adversity. And the wonderful thing is that we know these factors help adults also. The three factors are supportive adult relationships, building skills for adapting and self-regulation, and having positive experiences such as those found in sources of faith, hope, and cultural tradition. So now is our next Mentimeter question. And I want you to reflect on what are some protective factors that you had in your life growing up? And you can think about them in the terms that I just mentioned, our supportive relationships, skills that you've developed that help you adapt, and positive experience. And this is menti.com again with the same code that Danielle put in the chat for us. I'm not seeing any responses yet. Are we seeing any? Okay, there we go. Thank you. So this is a word cloud. Good parenting, supportive parents, reliable parents, a stable home life, having a safe environment, access to resources, community activities, good schools, mentorship, faith, speech, team, coaches, parents and siblings, music. We're seeing examples of where positive experiences and actually dance and music, sports, there's so much research about how positive those things are for regulation. And you can also think of it in terms of those positive supportive relationships, especially with the adults who are competent in those roles, and just the importance of that home life. And so while some of these may be things that weren't available to a person growing up, there are things that they can potentially still access today. And that's the wonderful thing about protective factors, is that they can stack up. And I'll give you some more examples of that here in a moment. So it's wonderful to reflect on the positive things that have helped us get where we are, and to know that we can in turn provide these types of things to other people who are needing that support as well. So thank you again for participating. You can think of risk factors like ACEs and protective factors in terms of a seesaw. So when positive experiences outweigh our negative experiences, the seesaw then can tip towards those positive outcomes. The fulcrum of that seesaw may be set at a different point based on the biology of the person, but over time, positive experiences can even shift the fulcrum of the seesaw, that balance point, and make it even easier for the seesaw to tip towards positive outcomes. Individuals may not do equally well in response to different forms of adversity, but generally these positive influences can stack and tip the scale towards resilience. Using the science of adversity to determine how we interact with our friends and family, coworkers, clients, partnering organizations, and communities is a practical application of trauma-informed principles. We shouldn't be afraid of and try to avoid all stress, because stress contributes to healthy development, and it is an essential piece of building our resilience to the ups and downs of life. And not all stress is harmful. Learning to cope with manageable threats develops resilience. With the help of supportive relationships with caring and competent adults, positive stress can be growth promoting. We can think of 3 types of stress. Positive stress is brief and moderate, and the physiological response can quickly return to a normal, healthy level. Toxic stress is on the other end of the spectrum. It's severe, chronic, and prolonged stress that is not a normal part of development. And tolerable stress is in the middle. It's serious, but generally short-term. And as mentioned with the seesaw, a greater number of positive experiences can help shift toward positive outcomes. This same effect can be experienced by adults with high ACE scores, where fostering a sense of hope and connection and having access to concrete support in times of need can produce better outcomes than people with high ACE scores who don't have those protective factors in their lives. This is all about buffering stress and about tipping the scales, helping that seesaw tip toward the positive outcomes. The Search Institute in Minnesota has expanded its research about developmental assets to look at developmental relationships. The developmental relationships framework has 5 elements, and they give specific actions as examples of what we can do that shows that when young people experience these things in their families, schools, programs, and communities, that they're more likely to be resilient in the face of challenges and to grow up thriving. So specific actions include for expressing care. These include being someone that a child can trust, really paying attention when you're together, often means putting down the phone these days, making them feel known and valued. Challenging growth. This is to expect them to live up to their potential and help them reflect on their mistakes. Providing support includes helping them build their confidence, help them advocate for themselves, and putting limits in place that help keep them on track. Expanding possibilities includes broadening their horizons and connecting them to people who can help them grow. And sharing power includes treating them fairly, working with them to solve problems, and creating opportunities for them to take action and lead. Another body of knowledge regarding building protective factors comes from the Strengthening Families framework. This framework puts responsibility on systems and programs to build protective factors for families in order to achieve strengthened families, optimal child development, and reduce likelihood of child abuse and neglect. Our task is to create the systems and programs that will build these protective factors for families. The first strategy is building parental resilience, which is helping families to manage stress and function well when faced with challenges, adversity, trauma. People in a position to help families can do this by helping to demonstrate that parents are valued, honor a family's race, language, culture, and history, encourage parents to manage stress and show them techniques to do so, support parents as decision makers and help build decision making and leadership skills, and help parents learn how to buffer their child during stressful times. Another protective factor to focus on is to help foster social connections by building positive relationships that provide emotional, informational, instrumental, and spiritual support. We can do this by helping families value, build, sustain, and use social connections. We can help create inclusive environments, help facilitate mutual support, and help promote engagement in community activities. Another protective factor is to build systems and programs that support knowledge of parenting and understanding of a child's physical, cognitive, language, social, and emotional development. We can do this by modeling appropriate interactions, providing information and resources on parenting and child development, helping to explore parenting issues or concerns and trying out new parenting strategies, and being sure to address issues from a strength-based perspective. Another protective factor for strengthening families is to help families access concrete support that addresses their needs and reduces the stress caused by these challenges. We can help by responding immediately when families are in crisis, by providing information and connections to other services in the community, and helping families develop skills and tools to identify their needs and connect to supports. And lastly, we can strengthen families by building supports that help them build social and emotional well-being for their children. We can help them create positive interactions that will help children communicate and regulate emotions. This includes helping parents foster their child's social emotional development, modeling nurturing support to children, including social and emotional development activities and programming, helping children develop a positive cultural identity and how to interact in a diverse society, and responding proactively when social or emotional development systems seem to need support. Our call to action is to create systems that recognize the presence of trauma and support resilience and hope. This will help us to develop a shared understanding of trauma-informed approaches and healing-centered care, to consider the role that trauma may be playing in the difficulties that people in our lives may be having, understanding directions, adhering to recommendations, or even making and getting to appointments. It can help us communicate in clear, concise, and positive ways. It can help us move from task-oriented interactions to person-centered interactions, and help us tailor strategies to meet individual needs, including flexibility, for example, in selecting times and places for meetings. This requires leadership support, staff engagement, and time. One way to respond to the knowledge we have is to integrate that knowledge into our policies and practices. An example is to move from a what's wrong approach to a what's happened approach. What's wrong approach would see a person that is not getting along with others and would see that they have poor social skills or just a bad attitude. A trauma-informed approach would be to look at this person and ask what happened that is affecting their ability to get along with others. Adversity can negatively impact a person's ability to form trusting relationships. Or we may see a person who keeps forgetting things and feel like they're just not paying attention, or maybe they're just getting old. And we can ask, what happened to affect her memory or attention? When a person who has experienced trauma is under stress, they pay attention to perceived threats as a matter of survival. And there could even be an underlying medical condition. I've worked a lot with maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting. And here's how an example of that home visiting can help break the trauma cycle. So if we think of a woman as a child, she experiences traumatic events without protective factors that buffer that stress. This puts her at higher risk of health and other challenges like early pregnancy, lower academic achievement, unstable relationships, mental health issues, substance use issues, chronic health issues. Well, she grows up and has her own child, and she decides to enroll in a home visiting program. In that program, she gets help from a home visitor. That person helps them set and reach goals, access resources, learn how to handle parenting challenges, and build protective factors for her child. These things should be sounding familiar. Now, as a parent, she has positive supportive experiences and reduces her child's risk of trauma, breaking the cycle. She has more support and is at less risk for the challenges that can contribute to her child's ACE score, and she's better able to buffer any stress that her child experiences. I want to give you a few more concrete examples as well. Since holding a summit on trauma and the adolescent brain in 2016, the Sacramento County Probation Department has working to be responsive to adolescent trauma. The staff at the youth detention facility there screen young people who are brought in with the child and adolescent trauma scale. And based on those results, youth with high ACEs are assigned to a trauma unit and offered in-depth trauma-oriented services. Additionally, they have implemented a multi-sensory de-escalation room in their detention facility. And this is to help youth who are feeling overwhelmed. It gives them an opportunity to get control of their emotions and behavior. In this room, they have calming tools, including dimmed lights, soothing smells, calming sounds, squeeze balls, jigsaw puzzles, and weighted blankets. And the data they collect shows that youth's emotional state drops an average of 4.5 points on a scale from 1 to 10 from when they enter the room to when they report that they are calmer. Some additional examples are going to talk about the types of domains that support implementation of trauma-informed approaches. So our approaches can be done in our governance and leadership, in our training and workforce development. We can ensure that we're doing cross-sector collaboration. We can ensure that we have strategies for financing these approaches. We can make sure our physical environment is conducive to being trauma-informed. We can look at our engagement and involvement. We can use screening, assessment, and treatment services. And then we can do progress monitoring and quality assurance and put these things in policy and evaluate the work that we're doing. So an example is a trauma-informed police department in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They have created department policies, culture, and capacity that focus on the well-being of staff and prevent re-traumatization. They have increased staff knowledge and skills in responding to individuals who experience trauma, and they've improved interactions with the public by responding in a trauma-informed manner. So governance and leadership, the leadership team at the police department was supportive of the initiative and actively involved in communicating their support, participating in the training. The staff attended a 3-day training focused on mindfulness and resilience, understanding trauma, and incorporating trauma-informed practice into work, and a new policy that required detectives to implement a trauma-informed interview procedure when interviewing individuals who experienced trauma was put in place. Another example is a trauma-informed elementary school in Nashville, Tennessee. They started gradual implementation in 2015 to move away from a focus on student compliance toward ensuring a feeling of safety, nurturing, and support among the students. So they did cross-sector collaboration. They partnered with a local nonprofit organization to establish a hub for family support. The hub brought together various community organizations, including churches, businesses, and universities, and provided monetary help and volunteer hours. And the school provided training on ACEs for collaborating partners. And they address their physical environment. Classrooms use warm lighting, calming colors, and essential oil diffusers. Teachers use mindfulness as a key strategy. They have a peace corner where students can go to calm down and reflect. They're equipped with a comfortable seat and a timer. Some have stuffed animals or maybe a worksheet where they can monitor their feelings and reactions. And last example here, trauma-informed healthcare system in San Francisco. Healthcare system is designed and resourced to be a protective factor that interrupts the impact of childhood and adult trauma on preventable illness, preventable death, and disparities in health. It includes the Women's HIV program, which implements a trauma-informed model of care. Examples from the engagement and involvement domain, they conduct formative focus groups with its patients to include those patients' voices in every aspect of the Women's HIV program. That program seeks ongoing patient feedback during monthly meetings, patient leadership and advocacy group. And in treatment services, their care includes trauma-specific interventions, including individual and group therapy, psychiatry, substance use counseling, and intensive outpatient program, and medication-assisted treatment for alcohol and opiate use. And they also have comprehensive primary care. Want to talk about prevention because we do want to implement experiences that or programs and policies that prevent adverse experiences and trauma altogether. When we talk about prevention, we can talk about 4 levels. Primordial prevention is going to address societal factors that are risk markers, such as poverty. Primary prevention is going to look to prevent those adversities from occurring. Secondary prevention is going to look to prevent ACEs from reoccurring or progressing. An ACE score of 2 is better than letting it get to an ACE score of 4, for example. And tertiary prevention provides supports to minimize the negative impacts of adversity and build resiliency among people who've experienced adversity. So again, a person with those supports and those protective factors, even with a history of trauma, will have much better well-being and outcomes. Different interventions can be working at multiple levels of prevention. They can have intergenerational impacts. For example, providing supports for parents who have experienced trauma, which might be considered tertiary prevention, can be secondary or maybe even primary prevention for the child in that home. Some strategies for preventing ACEs have been collated by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They released a publication looking at the research about which prevention activities have the greatest potential for impact. And they talk about 6 strategies that cover all 4 levels of prevention. By addressing the conditions that give rise to ACEs while addressing the needs of children and parents, those strategies take an intergenerational approach. Together, they can combine and reinforce each other. So the first strategy is to strengthen families' financial stability with economic support. The second strategy is to promote social norms that protect against violence and adversity. The third is to ensure that kids have a good start through early learning programs and affordable preschool and childcare programs. It's about teaching healthy relationship skills in strategy number 4. Connecting youth with positive, caring adult role models. Again, should see some interconnectedness with concepts that we've already learned in this presentation, and also intervening to lessen immediate and long-term harms. And this document from the CDC gives lots of specific examples. The strategies focus on changing norms, environments, and behaviors in ways that can prevent ACEs from happening in the first place, strengthening economic supports to families, promoting those social norms, ensuring that strong support, teaching those healthy relationship skills, connecting youth to caring adults and activities, which were many of the protective factors that you guys shared, and intervening to lessen those harms. And I just want you to think about some of the examples of programs and services serving the MCH population that align with these prevention strategies. Can we think of some examples? Good work already happening in North Dakota and things that we can do even more of. So samementi.com with the code that Danielle put in the PowerPoint or in the chat. So some examples already serving the maternal and child health population that you can think of. Nurse Family Partnership, which is a maternal infant early childhood home visiting program. Early intervention, the UWIC program, Head Start. Healthy Families, Right Track, community options at Catholic Charities. I'll have to look that up. And all of us who are implementing excellent prevention strategies also have ways to still consider ways that we can implement trauma-informed approaches in a way that might benefit our workplace, or ways that we can turn things into policy that might not currently be in policy, or ways to be engaging our parent voice in ways that they might not be engaged currently. Women's Care Center. So there's some excellent examples. Yes, home visiting is definitely one of the excellent, I would say, programs that are providing economic supports to families who are stressed. You know, the concrete need in times of support, all of our programs that are supporting nutritional needs, including WIC, programs that are helping to make childcare more affordable. All of those things are consistent with the prevention strategies. Whole Family Method program, St. Vincent de Paul. Thank you for sharing examples. Feel free to put some more in there. Knowing how to resist triggering trauma reactions is our 4th R. And this is to know how policies, practices, and interventions can interfere with the well-being of staff, clients, and communities, often through inadvertently triggering traumatic experiences. But we can acknowledge trauma in its context in all of our operations to help avoid reinforcing or repeating a traumatic experience. So within systems, examples of how a person may be re-traumatized is having to continually retell their story, being treated as a number, procedures that require disrobing, being seen by their label, not having a choice in service or treatment, not having the opportunity to give feedback about their experience. And a lot of these are seen as just the way things are done, but they can definitely be reconsidered from a trauma-informed lens. Another example for the potential for re-traumatization is in settings where emotions may be high or there may be a sense of powerlessness. This can be in healthcare, social services, interaction with law enforcement. This can be very surprising to helping professionals because they feel we're here to help. We work really hard. How can our environments be triggering for, or maybe even re-traumatize the people we work with? But if you think about how activities that are business as usual to us may create significant stress for patients and families who have specific vulnerabilities that we don't even know about. People who've experienced trauma do not necessarily look different than others, so we don't easily identify vulnerabilities that the patients may bring. But sights and sounds in the care environment can be powerful reminders of past events. The overall lack of power and control is a common trigger. That perception of barriers or hassles can create a sense of disempowerment. Medical procedures that are overly directive or hurried can be perceived as belittling, critical, or attacking. And experiencing communication difficulties and feeling misunderstood can trigger those feelings of powerlessness as well. Lack of predictability and control, not understanding what will happen next, feeling less valued or respected can create feelings of rejection and worthlessness, and even just receiving difficult news. So everything that a provider or helper does has an impact, and they're in a position to really strongly support healing and intentionally avoid causing harm, even if it was going to be accidental. So back to our principles, here are some system-wide understandings. For safety, we can create an environment where people are protected from danger. We can cultivate an open attitude and skills in learning about diverse cultures and identities, consider the impact of historical oppression and the role of privilege and power, and uplift the voices and experiences of marginalized groups. We can create an open and honest culture with processes to share information and include diverse perspectives in decision-making. And we can ensure respect for subjective perception and objective truths. And we can develop autonomy and respect for personal freedom and control grounded in fully informed consent. We can demonstrate reliability and credibility in relationships while balancing consistency and flexibility. We can maintain privacy and confidentiality and respect healthy boundaries. We can create a culture of understanding and interacting with people based on respect, validation and affirmation, non-judgment, and shared humanity. We can support policies and practices for the physical, emotional, relational, and cognitive well-being of our staff and our clients and community members. We can be mindful of vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. And we can focus on assets and resources over problems and deficits, and incorporate recovery-oriented, healing-centered, person-centered approaches that uplift dignity and integrate concepts of resilience. As an example of an organizational practice, many of our organizations are probably familiar with creating SMART goals when they create strategic plans. But part of being trauma-informed means making sure that the people being impacted by our decisions are part of our decision-making. And one way we can do this is to turn our SMART goals into SMARTY goals. When we add inclusive, it's bringing disproportionately affected people into the process and activities and decision making in a way that is sharing power. And when we bring in the equitable, we are addressing how we'll include an element of fairness and justice that is going to help address any systemic barriers. This can help us make sure that we have tangible and actionable steps to help us. So the example here is moving from a SMART goal to expand youth mentorship into 3 new counties by the end of June into a SMARTY goal. That is to do that with volunteer task force that are representative of the community by age, gender, race, and other characteristics who are advising the expansion. So that's inclusive and equitable because they've now become part of the decision making as well. When we look at the history of how work has been done in communities, the majority of work has been conducted from the standpoint of supremacist design systems. These are systems that, regardless of their intent, maintain the structures and reinforce inequities that have long been entrenched in our institutions and policies. Savior design systems are those that are designed to rescue vulnerable communities. They may deliver services that a community needs, but the services and the needs have been defined from outside the community. And a lot of communities may be cautious about that work because it comes from this outsider perspective where they feel like they're there to save them. Ally design systems are a move in the right direction. In this case, there's an outside institution such as a university or state department that's in control. But ultimately, our goal is to have equity-empowered systems, which are purposely reconstructed to value diversity of experience at all levels and to actively work to change structures. When we talk about the importance of communities, it's helpful to think about the community as a living spiritual entity supported by every responsible adult. That one of the first things that has to be done is to ask the community what is important to the community, and that shouting self-care at people who actually need community care is how we fail people. The principles of supporting self-healing communities are very consistent with the principles of being trauma-informed. It includes empowerment, it includes learning, it includes inclusive leadership, nurturing feelings of hope and efficacy. This is an example of an excellent approach to working with communities that is trauma-informed. Ultimately, our commitment to community should be to invite everyone to participate, demonstrate mutual respect, meet people where they are, engage with curiosity and compassion, use inclusive language, pay attention to how often and long we speak from our own experience, engage in reflection, recognize that many of us have our own trauma histories, commit to community empowerment, and commit to do no harm. Creating a culture of trauma-informed care requires us to look at our organizational culture, at the way we treat each other, and at the way we treat those we serve. It requires us to be intentional about creating a culture that is safe and respectful for everyone. When we think about our workforces, trauma-informed workplaces benefit everyone because they serve as a protective factor. They can enhance safety, health, wellness, trust, and productivity, and they have positive ripple effects on the team members, families, and communities as well. There are many examples of how to foster trauma-informed approaches for the workplace, and I invite you to look for resources online. There is no one way to create a trauma-informed approach for the workplace, but includes holistic well-being and mental health, creating opportunities for connection, anchoring work culture and shared values, collaborating meaningfully, improving the physical and psychological safety of the workplace, building trust and transparency, and leading with empathy. So in summary, we have learned how to realize the impacts of trauma, the prevalence of trauma that is out there, and recognize how it impacts us and our communities, to respond to the knowledge that we've learned and to find ways that we can implement that, and to resist re-traumatization. And if you think about this, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment it grows in, not the flower. So thank you for all of you who've been on. NDSU offers a range of continuing education opportunities, including the subplan in our Masters of Public Health, and you can learn more on our website. After the completion of the Lunch and Learn series, all 4 sessions are going to be on North Dakota Train, and anybody will be able to view them on North Dakota Train for free, and they'll still be eligible for CEUs and still eligible to buy a badge. So Danielle, have you put the link to the post-test? Okay, she is not. Okay, there is the post-test, and you can register after you've done the post-test for CE credit from the North Dakota Board of Nursing or the North Dakota Board of Social Work, or you can also just get a certificate of attendance. It will take a few days to process the certificate, and same with the digital badging. So for example, if you're able to attend all 4, whether it's live now or by viewing the recordings later, you'll be able to get a badge for the entire maternal, and child health Lunch and Learn series. Happy to tell you more about that. Contact information for myself and Danielle, and again, the link to the post-test, which will in turn take you to the link to register for CE credit. Lots of excellent references. Happy to make this presentation available to you. To actually have the presentation, feel free to reach out. We are right at time, but I am happy to answer a question if anybody has a burning question or comment. And thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. If any of you are still on, have a particular question for us?